Word nerd, wordsmith, wordy, wordless. Oxford Dictionary says a word is a single, distinct, meaningful element of speech or writing, used with others or sometimes alone. We say each one matters. No extra words is literature, minimalist style. And we're getting you right to the story. The Diet by Diane Valentine. He walked around the grocery store with a list of healthy foods he needed to buy. The aroma of freshly made donuts beckoned him like a lover. He'd just joined one of those groups to help him lose the extra weight he'd been carrying around the past few years. The formula was simple: eat less, eat healthy, exercise more. Donuts were not one of the recommended items. A bag of mini carrots, but his mind was on donuts. A bag of ready-made salad. His mouth watered, but not for fresh produce. Low fat this and no sugar added that. He even put light beer in the cart. Making one last lap around the store, the donuts were a magnet, pulling him to the bakery counter. His resolve weakened. What could it hurt? Besides, he was just starting this program. He took a small white bakery bag and opened it up. He took a tissue from the box and opened the glass door. Light shone on the sugary, glistening glaze. The oozing sugar raspberry filling were lips waiting to be kissed. He imagined his tongue slipping, drawing out the gel, and the texture as each bite rolling around on his tongue. "It would be best if you put that back where you found it, sir," a female voice said just as he lifted a jelly donut off the tray. It was the facilitator, from the diet group. He joined an hour ago. "It's for my wife," he lied. His ears burned. "I doubt that," she snapped and stalked away. He sighed, setting the pastry gently, reverently, back onto the tray, crumpling the tissue, and put it in his pocket. He pushed the cart to the cashier. Later, he would lick the paper.
The Man Who Taught My Children About Dragonflies. He was in his 60s, tall and bearded, wearing flannel and jeans. A retiree, I thought, maybe an ex-teacher, volunteering now at the educational farm I was visiting with my kids. They took to him straight away, followed him down lanes and across fields. He told them about the plants and animals they saw, answered their questions with good humour. I dawdled at the back of the group, half listening. When we reached the pond, he stopped and put his fingers on his lips. The kids quietened and waited while he scanned the water. Spotting a dragonfly, he bent at the waist and scooped it into his hands. We gathered around and examined the thin black legs, the translucent wings. "Black-tailed skimmer," he said, pointing to the long blue abdomen that tapered to black. "It can fly forwards and backwards, upwards and downwards." He cupped the dragonfly in his hands, and one of the kids asked if she could hold it. But something shifted in the dragonfly's tolerance. Some instinct to escape asserted itself. The man opened his hands, and the dragonfly flew away. Later, I saw him at the market stall. He was buying a slice of lemon cake. "My wife's favourite," he said. That evening, I saw him again on the national news. He had changed from his work jeans and boots and was wearing a shirt and tie. His wife stood beside him, a middle-aged woman on the cusp of old age. He was holding her hand. Behind them, a photograph of a young woman flashed on the screen. She looked to be about 18. His daughter. She'd been missing for 10 years, and today was the anniversary of her disappearance. The man was hoping his appearing on TV might jog someone's memory, uncover a new lead. I watched his appeal in silence, wondered how much longer he could hold on to hope before a gust or a breeze or a puff emptied his palms, revealing the nothingness they enclosed, the memory of his daughter borne away on oversized wings.
Hello there. Welcome to No Extra Words, the Flash Fiction Podcast. My name is Chris Baker-Dersch. I'm your producer and editor. We are back to normal this week, more or less. If the Christmas serial is the first time you heard of us, you should know this is more our usual format to do a short series of flash fiction. It's a little longer than usual because we're trying to squeeze in 4 stories today. Usually we stick with 2 or 3. But today's episode is a fresh start for your new year. New Year, I'm going to rain on everyone's parade for a minute and confess that New Year is not one of my personal favorite holidays. It feels very forced and you have to be in one place for the 10 seconds that are in your right time zone, and then you go home, you go to bed, you wake up and everyone tells you to go on a diet. But I'm trying to shed my New Year Grinch a little bit with this episode and understand that reflection and a clean break is not necessarily a bad thing. So today's stories are about folks who need or are making a fresh start. And we started with everyone's favorite New Year's nemesis, the diet, and then moved on to a story of someone who really needs a fresh start and maybe is finding a way to do that in nature, with Eileen Hunt's The Man Who Taught My Children About Dragonflies. Coming up next, a very, very brief piece of microfiction called Flowers about the reasons we celebrate. And we're going to conclude with a really wonderful story of love with Dallas Woodburn's How My Parents Fell in Love. I hope you are still finding some festivity. In my house, we do the 12 days of Christmas, so we're still in the height of the holiday season right now. And I hope wherever your holidays are taking you this week, they're safe and blessed, and you will enjoy your return to normal as we ease back into the new year. Coming up next week on the podcast, we will launch Contributor Appreciation Month, which is the month of January. If you are a contributor to the show, which means either a piece of your fiction has appeared on the show or will appear on the show, and you don't know about Contributor Appreciation Month, please visit our website, noextrawords.wordpress.com, and click on that link that says Info for Contributors. And you have a chance to enter to win some cool prizes from our sponsor, Chanilla, which is sponsoring Contributor Appreciation Month. For the audience, you're going to get a chance to learn more about some of our contributors to the show. When you're hearing this, it is not too late, contributors, to get those extra entries in. So when you read about how to do that, it is absolutely not too late. One of my New Year's resolutions for the show was to create new introductions and outros, I think is what they call it in the biz, because when you listen to shows back to back, the stories are tending to run together a little bit. So we have new introductory and closing little bits to the show, and with that has come new theme music. I have really enjoyed using Reverie Small Theme by Ghost, which was our theme music from the beginning, but this new setup for the show sort of called for some new theme music and our own fresh start. So what you are hearing is actually a wonderful piece of classical music. It is by Bach. It's Aria Variata. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. And it is played for you by Brendan Kinsella, and that is in the public domain. Would love to hear what you have to think about our new sound. But in the meantime, I'm going to get you back to the short fiction, and I will see you in January. Happy New Year from No Extra Words, the Flash Fiction Podcast. Flowers by Charles Rafferty. We send them for birthdays and funerals, apologies and declarations of our sexual intent. The true aficionado disdains all flower shop bouquets, and only the vainest among us prefers they be delivered at work. All other gestures fall short. A box of Belgian chocolates for the death of your son? A basket of fruit to carry down the aisle? Only cards are more widespread, but everyone knows cards are the poor man's flowers, the lazy man's. As you press your face into these tiger lilies, I want you to consider the labor I took to find this many perfect blooms in the meadow beside the highway, and then to climb through the downstairs window without waking the dog or your husband, and leave them in the center of the dining room table, without chocolate or fruit, without so much as a card to tell you who I am, or to say when I'll be back. How My Parents Fell in Love by Dallas Woodburn. My mother walked out of a grocery store. She wore a red dress and her hair was permed, the way it looks in the photo albums. My father drove up in a car, a fast car, silver, a car that goes vroom vroom. He did not know her yet. She was a pretty woman in a red dress with ruffles at the hem. He rolled down the window. He leaned out and smiled at her and said, "Hubba hubba." They fell in love and lived happily ever after. My mother walked out of a grocery store. She carried a plastic bag, handle stretched taut in her thin fingers. Eggs, milk, strawberries. My father drove up in a car, vroom vroom. He liked my mother's red dress and her mess of dark brown hair. He rolled down the window and said, "Hubba hubba." My mother was so startled she dropped her groceries. The milk was okay, but the eggs cracked, oozing yolks onto the sidewalk. My father crouched down and helped my mother clean up the mess. He wore dress pants and a tie, like the photos in his college yearbook. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's okay," she said. "It's not your fault, really." They smiled at each other. He bought her a new carton of eggs. They fell in love and lived happily ever after. My mother walked out of the student union. She wore a red dress and carried a canvas book bag. My father rode up on a bicycle, glints of silver showing through the chipped paint. He wore a plain t-shirt and his hair hung down over his eyes. My mother, in a rush, distracted, digging through her bag like the nearby beach gulls dug for crabs in the sand, accidentally dropped her coin purse on the sidewalk steps. It snapped open. Coins spilled across the cement. My father stopped his bike with a screech of tires. He crouched down and helped my mother pick up her coins. Their skin touched as he placed pennies in her palm one by one. She smiled at him. Hubba hubba, he thought. They fell in love and lived happily ever after. My mother walked out of the rain and into the crowded apartment. She wore a red dress and her silver necklace with the star clasp. A Christmas tree beamed in the corner. People danced, laughed, tilted plastic cups against their lips. My father noticed my mother as soon as she stepped through the doorway. Her dark hair looked darker from the rain, and beads of water trickled down her legs. He didn't know what to say, what he could ever say to her that would be enough. So instead he waited. He stood by the bathroom under the mistletoe, watching my mother and willing her to notice him. Finally she did, but only because she had to use the bathroom. It was occupied, so she stood in line beside my father. She, slightly drunk, spilled a bit of red wine on his shoe. He didn't mind. "Hi," he said, glancing up at the mistletoe above them. "Hello," my mother said. When she leaned forward to shake his hand, her necklace slipped off into a small silver puddle on the floor. My father crouched down and picked it up. Their skin touched as he placed it carefully in her palm. She smiled at him. "Put it on for me?" she asked, pulling up her dark, permed hair to reveal the back of her neck. Her fingers trembled with the clasp. "Hubba hubba," my father found himself saying. My mother laughed. "Look," someone shouted, "you're under the mistletoe." Later, my father walked my mother back to her dormitory. They fell in love and lived happily ever after. My mother was invited to a Christmas party by a girl in her psychology class. She didn't know the girl very well, but it was a Friday night and she had no other plans, so she went. Her dangling silver earrings flashed against her dark hair. She carried a grocery bag, handle stretched taut with the weight of the chocolate cake she had baked that morning and carefully iced with a frosting Christmas tree. The kitchen was empty save for 3 frat guys refilling their cups of eggnog, and a girl arranging sugar cookies on a plate, and my father, who stood at the sink struggling in vain to wash a red wine stain from his shirt. It was hot in the kitchen, and my mother noticed a bead of sweat trickling down the back of his neck. Suddenly she found herself stumbling forward, tripping over something in her red high heels, a case of beer, a sack of flour, an empty carton of eggs. The plastic bag lurched from her grasp, and she watched the cake smash sadly against the kitchen floor. My father turned from the sink and saw my mother. To him, she was just a pretty woman in a red dress, and yet... He hurried over and crouched down to help my mother clean up the mess. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she sighed. "Just clumsy. I spent all afternoon making this cake, and now it's ruined." "I'm sure it's still delicious," my father said, digging his hand into the dark, moist cake and bringing it to his mouth, purposefully smearing his face with frosting. He loudly smacked his lips and grinned at her. My mother laughed. My father stood, then reached down to help her up. Their skin touched. They washed cake and frosting off their hands at the sink. My father poured my mother a cup of eggnog. Their hands found each other again. Later that night they kissed under the mistletoe. They fell in love. And they lived happily, also angrily, naughtily, hopelessly, hungrily, messily, ever after, like saints and martyrs and lovers and children. They lived, and they live, together still. Thanks for listening to the No Extra Words podcast. For more information on today's stories and contributors, or to learn how to submit your own work, please visit us at noextrawords.wordpress.com. The best support you can give the show is to recommend us to your family and friends. See you next time.